moment you have been waiting for, and this is where we are going to talk about the birth of rock. Anyways, so this is Mr. E, also known as the bearded music teacher across a ton of different places. This podcast, I just want to remind listeners that this is both a video and an audio podcast that is going to be recorded at the same time. And these podcasts, these video cast vlogs, are also used for my students if they need to review concepts, or if I need to be out for some reason. I go, hey, check this out. Boom. Watch it. Give me a summary, things like that. So you'll see a lot of things and hear a lot of things that are in reference to my classroom. But this is for educational purposes. Also, no recordings of music will be shared, um, either in the video or in the audio version of this episode, along with previous and future ones, just because of copyright. I don't want to violate copyrights. As an artist myself, I really appreciate those. Now, let's talk about the birth and flourish of rock. Now, a lot of music historians, specifically the ones that focus on rock music, deem 1955 as um, the year that we kind of started rock. But before 1955, rhythm and blues and country and western were again not considered mainstream. And after World War II, R&B music became the music of the young teenage people, or the young people of the time. And when the teens really uh, facilitated the R&B breaking into the mainstream in the 1950s, so did rock music. It's very worth noting that rock music is kind of like this really weird mutation of country, rhythm and blues, delta blues, urban blues, which again later becomes rhythm and blues, all mixed together. And none of this could have happened without the middle class teenagers and their rebellious nature of the time. Now, the first wave of rock we consider to be between the years 1955 and 1960. And, well, 1959, kind of. But, anyways, these pioneers of rock include Fats Domino, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Bill Haley, Elvis, or Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Buddy Holly. These are known as the first wave of rock. Now, the R&B still thrives. R&B still is thriving even in today's music scene. Um, but there is a group of people that shoot off and do rock, and thus the first wave of rock. While early generations were expected to fall in line and assimilate into society, we see more rebellious teens and young adults come up in the 1950s that say, you know what? We don't want to listen to the old music. And the adolescents wanted music that didn't sound like their parents, and instead they found that exotic, what they deemed in a lot of accounts as exotic, or there's other terms that I wouldn't want to say on the podcast, but they were deemed quote exotic sounds of R&B, because you have to remember in the 1950s we're still pre-civil rights movement in the United States. So a lot of times the white teenagers of that time, it was, I guess, forbidden to go and listen and be a part of the what was considered the black music movement, or the black music, or the black audiences. Um, that's what they were called. And so the African American music scene um, was predominantly by African Americans, but then the teenagers were like, whoa, wait. And young adults were like, wait, of at least of the white middle class of the United States, they looked at it and go, wait, that's some really cool music. I really like that. And even the idea of the rebellious and juvenile delinquency that was brought out as what's later as the or the rocker image, um, they really, really, really gravitate toward that. The idea of partying and also known as rocking, the idea of having fun. Those are the parts that really resonate with the teenagers. Now, we have to realize that this also comes with the rise of the DJ or disc jockey. At the end of the 1950s, technology enhancements made radio available to everyone. And in 1951, Alan Freed was the announcer at a radio station in Cleveland, hosting an evening show sponsored by a big record company at the time, a big record company store um, called Rendezvous, and it was done by Leo Mintz. And Mintz saw trends of record sales toward R&B music, and so he offered a spot on a late night show, just doing R&B music to Freed. And the reason why I was in the late night slot was that it was deemed not mainstream by the music business, by the radio business. So they kind of put it down at the end of the day. Boom, done. All right. So he had his first broadcast on July 11th, 1951, and that was the Moondog Show on WJW. It was a clear channel station reaching far out of Ohio. All right. So again, this is the reason why um, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is really centered in Cleveland. This is one of the main reasons. All right. So earlier though, Dewey Phillips had a show in Memphis, a station in Nashville, and one in L.A. All did this before Freed. So Dewey Phillips was the prototype, if you will, for what Freed would eventually do. Freed even used the Nashville show as the model for the Moondog show. So you have these R&B things that pop up in Memphis and in Nashville. And Alan Freed looks at it as the nice businessman that he is. He goes, you know what? I could do that. So he started in Cleveland at WJW. Then his success grew in the matter of 3 years. And in 1954, he debuted in New York and renamed the show the Rock and Roll Party. And that even grew more in 1958 to do a concert show called The Big Beat. And Alan Freed, by a lot of sources, is deemed the father of rock and roll. Now, the interesting thing about the Moondog, um, and if the video now is showing a picture of Alan Freed, um, what you don't realize is that he had to change the Moondog, uh, I guess you could say, handle the Moondog name, because he actually was attempted to be sued by a I believe the story goes is that he was being sued or threatened to be sued by a panhandler in New York who had a very big reputation as being known as Moondog, and so he switched out and decided just to go by the Rock and Roll Party and go by the name Alan Freed, his actual name. There are things on YouTube and other video sites where you can find the, I guess, the apparent broadcast or early broadcasts of Alan Freed. There are archival things of Alan Freed in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which I have yet to look into. There's hundreds of things out there, specifically in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that are like that. But the idea of how R&B switched over, well, grew out, a segment of R&B grew out to be rock music, had this idea of crossover and covers. Now, in class, I go over what is a crossover and what is a cover. These are two different things. Now, we have to realize is that if you were a record salesman or record label, you had to spot the trends that are greatly increasing for having the right product and where it needed to be at the timed precisely to meet the customer demand. You had to be able to, as a record label and salesman, to spot these trends, to look at where the best possible profits could be later on, and pump the market, just push the market with these certain records that you knew would probably be popular um, in the jukeboxes and things like that, and radio stations. Now, the two big ones were Cashbox and Billboard. Billboard is the mainstay in today's society. That's where we chart all of our stuff. But both contained sales charts that attempted to predict the trends in record sales, and jukebox sales. So again, what you would do is you would look at, as a record salesman and a record label, you would look at these trends that are greatly increasing for having the right product um, in the right time, and time it precisely, so that way your customers be like, oh, yay. So the pop charts listed records that would most likely be marketed toward the white middle class listeners. Then we had the R&B charts, which were mainly targeting African American urban listeners. And then we had the country and western charts that were targeted toward the low income white families. And one of the most significant changes to these business practices occurred during the early 1950s, when white middle class teens discovered R&B, which led to the softening of these charts. Before the early 1950s, we had a clear dividing line: pop, R&B, country, and western. Those were the three charts. That was it. And then we started seeing one song, for example, maybe be in the R&B charts, and then you'll see it appear in the pop charts. That's called a crossover. It's where it holds a predominant, a record or a song holds a predominant position on more than one of the three main charts at the time. So country, R&B, pop. Now, a new version of a song, all right, just let's go back to the last podcast where we talked about Blue Yodel and T for Texas. That is a cover. All right, T for Texas is a cover. What we do is we take those songs, the original songs, and we make it our own way. All right, that is called a cover. And until 1955, the chart boundaries were fairly reliable for the most part. Records and songs popular on one chart stayed on the chart, and the idea of crossing over was the exception to the rule. Now, here is some surprising statistics which lend itself to the idea of how rock grew. Now, remember, rock has a really strong roots in R&B. So between 1950 and 1953, the American market saw roughly 10% of the hits on the R&B charts cross over. By 1954, that trend increased to 25, and then by 1958, roughly 94% had crossed over. And that really gives way to the birth of rock. Now, in the next podcasts, we're going to talk about Fats Domino. We're going to talk about Chuck Berry. And we're also going to talk about Little Richard. Those are the three guys I kind of grouped together with their blues backgrounds. They have a lot of blues in their music. And honestly, I just randomly picked three right off the top. These guys, I start out with a bang because I believe Fats Domino is really underrated as a rock musician. Little Richard is definitely up there with Fats Domino playing the piano. And then, of course, Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry was known as that good, solid blues guitarist, and he even changed the way we play guitar. And we'll talk about that all in the next podcast. So, until then, make sure you check out these resources. Go check out Alan Freed. Go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Go to the Rock Hall EDU. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's edu.rockhall.com, or search Rock Hall EDU. There is a bunch of different resources that are right now are free to the public. If you just log in, create an account, or you don't even have to log in, I don't believe, or create an account, you can just simply see all these different things and some amazing resources.